Joining me now to discuss this is the Victorian Opposition Leader, Michael O'Brien. Michael, welcome to the show. The judicial inquiry into what has gone wrong in Victoria, now affecting the whole country, it's not going to report until September. So how can we have any confidence that the Andrews government and other states as well have learnt these lessons?
Good evening, Sherry. Well, look, I think the simple answer is that we can't. We can't have confidence in this Premier because he's made too many mistakes. He's done too many U-turns. 7 days ago, Daniel Andrews was still telling Victorians that it was not necessary to wear a mask. By Thursday, it became recommended to wear a mask. And now, as of Sunday, the news is it's going to be compulsory to wear a mask, backed by a threat of fines. In all the finger-wagging and lecturing we've received from the Premier, we've never heard him say, my government made a complete hash of hotel quarantine. We let the virus escape into the community and we are responsible for this second wave. I think Daniel Andrews' exhortations, and some of them are sensible, but he'd be listened to a lot more by Victorians if he just stood up, admitted that his government has led us back into lockdown and accepted responsibility for that.
Michael, not only is he refusing to accept responsibility, but he is also refusing to answer just basic questions that journalists are posing to him every day. But my question to you is, you've said heads should roll in Victoria over this debacle, but you haven't called for the Premier to resign. Do you not think that he's ultimately responsible?
Sherry, I think that time will come. What I've done today is we know from leaked emails that were published in the media just this last week that both the Health Department and the Emergency Services Department were told about the problems in Victorian hotel quarantine on day one, and they did nothing about it. They failed to act. They failed to bring in the police. They failed to bring in the ADF. They let untrained, unqualified, and frankly unprofessional private security guards deal with one of the most toxic health issues that we face. And we're now reaping the consequences. So I've said the Health Minister and the Emergency Services Minister are both directly responsible for this. They must go because they're incompetent. They're not up to the job. But when it comes to Andrews, look, the feedback I'm getting is that I think people just need us to get through this. Not just Victorians, Australians need Victoria to get through it. And as much as I think Andrews is culpable, and I think this inquiry will demonstrate that, we do need to just get through this at this time.
These decisions have not just slowed down Australia's economic recovery, but people have lost their lives. And you're saying you don't think Dan Andrews should lose his job as a result of it?
I'm not saying that, Sherry. What I'm saying is that I think that ultimately Andrews is responsible for what has been a complete and utter disaster. And I think that the inquiry will demonstrate that. What we need to do is we need to get through this absolute massive health issue. I don't want to see a single life lost unnecessarily. Now, unfortunately, Victorians have already died because of this Labor government's botched handling of hotel quarantine. That's the fact. And heads should roll. And ultimately, I believe Daniel Andrews' head should roll as well. The question is, in the middle of a pandemic, when we are dealing with massive consequences for all Victorians, 5 million of us that are locked down and others that are facing shut borders in the country, what's the right time for this to occur? As I've said, I think that the inquiry will demonstrate that Andrews has been culpable and incapable and should go. But really, we need to get through some shocking issues that we're facing today.
Do you agree with the decision today to make masks mandatory? And if they are mandatory in some areas, like Melbourne and Mitchell Shire, do you think that means that the lockdown should be lifted?
Well, Sherry, as a politician and somebody, I practiced in law before I got into politics. I'm not a medical expert. And frankly, I'm not going to second guess medical experts. I think that if the advice coming from the federal health authorities and the Victorian health authorities is both the same, if they're both saying that mandatory mask wearing when you're outside should be followed, then I'm not going to argue with that.
But if you follow the medical advice 2 months ago was that, or even 2 weeks ago, was that masks aren't necessary. So do you think they should be mandatory or not?
Well, Sherry, as I said, I'm not going to second guess the professional advice of the federal health authorities and the Victorian health authorities, but I think Victorians are asking questions. And even today, the Premier said, well, I don't expect you to wear a mask if you're going for a run. Well, what if you're going for a jog? What if you're going for a quick walk? And this has got so many grey areas, Sherry. It's got so many questions that Victorians who aren't looking for loopholes, they're just looking for answers. And frankly, they're entitled to answers, and the government is not giving it.
Look, the mishandling of this second wave of this pandemic that's led to this second wave by the Andrews government is very clear, and yet the Premier's approval ratings are still solid. What does that say about the opposition you lead, that people would choose to re-elect this incompetent Andrews government?
Well, Shari, if you actually look at the most recent polling data, which was released during the week, it shows you that Andrews has got the least support of any Premier in the country.
But it's still high. It's still higher than your approval ratings.
Well, I don't know about that, Shari. There haven't been any approval ratings that have factored in the Leader of the Opposition. But let me tell you this. What you see is that in the middle of a pandemic, like in the middle of a war, or in the middle of a natural disaster like bushfires, all leaders' approval ratings go up because the public, regardless of whether you voted for them, the public wants the leadership to get the country, to get the state through it. But what the latest data shows is that Victorians have less confidence in their leader than any state in the country. And why wouldn't they, given the mistakes that Andrews and his ministers have made that have led us back into lockdown unlike any other state in the country?
Look, polls aside, your team very clearly has not been effective. It is not in a competitive position. Do you plan on doing anything differently to give the people of Victoria a legitimate choice come the next election?
Well, Shari, I completely disagree with your characterisation of my team. I absolutely disagree. I can tell you what I've done. I have stood up and I've told Victorians if they want to see Victoria out of Daniel Andrews' Belt and Road Agreement, they're going to vote for Michael O'Brien and the Liberal Nationals, because I will take Victoria out of Belt and Road because it is a bad deal. It's a bad deal for our jobs. It's a bad deal for our security. It's a bad deal for our sovereignty. I have said I am not supporting Andrews in terms of his new taxes, massive new borrowings. If Victorians want a tax and spend government, don't vote for me. But if they want a government that's going to create jobs and get the economy back, that's what me and my team are going to be offering.
Michael, you bring up the Belt and Road Agreement, and it's such a good point. You know, the Belt and Road initiative that the Andrews government has adopted against national security advice, and on top of that, the incompetency of how they've handled this pandemic, and yet his government, his team is still more popular than yours. Do you have any plan to change anything before the next election?
Well, Shari, again, I'm sorry, you're just not right in your argument there. There hasn't been a two-party preferred opinion poll that's been conducted during the pandemic. What the most recent data has shown is that Labor is the least trusted party of all the states in Victoria to lead through this pandemic.
His latest poll numbers, though, are still over 50%. People would still prefer him as Premier to you, despite all of this.
Well, I'm sorry, Shari, that's just not right, because what the latest poll showed, well, the question was, did they support Andrews' handling of the pandemic? And it was 50%, which was the lowest of any state Premier in the country, or Prime Minister for that matter. But I've got two jobs, Shari. I've got the job of holding Labor accountable, asking questions, tough questions that need to be asked, demanding answers, demanding accountability.
But my question to you is, do you plan on changing anything before the next election to lift your approval ratings, to hold this government to account, to give the people a real choice at the election?
Well, Shari, I've just told you, I'm going to stand up for Victoria against Belt and Road and against Daniel Andrews' dud deal with the Chinese Communist government. I'm going to be putting forward, and I've already put forward with my team, plans to get Victoria back to work and back in business. We released a policy back in May, which would do just that, about cutting taxes, cutting red tape, giving Victorians incentive again, rather than this overtaxing, over-regulating, over-borrowing Labor government that we have in Victoria. There's over 2 years till the next election. Every day we're going to hold Labor accountable. Every day we're going to put forward a better alternative. And I'm very confident that in 2 years' time, Victorians will understand that me and my team offer Victorians a much brighter future than Daniel Andrews and his discredited group of ministers.
Okay.